Hey guys, welcome back to Always Time for True Crime. I'm your host, Julia, and today's case is one that's full of twists and turns, and one that can leave you sad, angry, and confused all at the same time. It's the story of a little boy whose life was cut short, and whose killer was not brought to justice for 25 years. This is the murder of Timothy Wiltsey. Before we get started, I just want to give a warning to everybody that this episode deals with the death of a child. I don't go into huge graphic detail or anything like that, but I did want to give you guys a heads up on the subject matter. So like I said before, today we're going to be discussing the case of Timothy Wiltsey. Timothy Wiltsey was born August 6, 1985 to 17-year-old Michelle Ledzinski and 18-year-old George Wiltsey. The two teenagers met in the early 1980s in George's home state of Iowa, and when Michelle had to return home to New Jersey, George followed her. Soon, in the fall of 1984, Michelle got pregnant, and the two decided to move back to Iowa to raise Timothy. Michelle gave birth to Timmy, a healthy baby boy, in the summer of 1985. But the couple's happiness was very short-lived, as after 6 months, Michelle took the baby and moved back to New Jersey to be with her family. According to teachers and acquaintances, Timmy was a quiet, sweet 5-year-old boy who liked fire trucks, Ninja Turtles, and his cat, Norton. He had brown hair, brown eyes, and the cutest little smile. I'm actually going to post a picture of him on Instagram, so you guys should head over to Always Time for True Crime and check it out. May 25th, 1991 started off as a normal day for Michelle and Timmy. It was the Saturday of a long weekend, and Michelle had taken Timmy to the park earlier in the day before the two went to spend the evening at the Memorial Day Weekend Carnival at JFK Memorial Park in Sayreville, New Jersey. Michelle says she and Timmy arrived at the carnival at approximately 7 p.m., and even though Timmy was only 5 years old, he wanted to go on all the rides. Then, around 7:30, Michelle left Timmy to hold their place in line for the next ride as she went to go get a soda at a nearby concession stand. While in line, she continued to keep a watchful eye on Timmy. Then, after buying a soda, she looked down to put her change back into her wallet. When her eyes came back up, Timmy was nowhere to be found. And I know some listeners are probably wondering why she would leave her 5-year-old child alone in the first place. But remember, this is the early 90s, and times were different. Not saying that all parents would have done that, but maybe it wasn't as big of a deal? I don't know. So Michelle called around for Timmy and walked around the carnival for a few minutes before seeing her niece in the distance. Her niece, Jennifer Blair, and her friend, Danielle Girding, both 14 at the time, would often babysit Timmy together, and the four of them had planned to meet up at the carnival that evening. When the two girls approached Michelle, she calmly told them that Timmy was missing. The three of them searched the carnival grounds together, and one of the girls gave the carnival disc jockey a description of Timmy. He made an announcement across the park that a boy named Timmy was missing, wearing a red shirt, shorts, and Ninja Turtle sneakers. After about an hour of searching themselves, the three ran into a police officer monitoring the carnival and told them what was going on. In my opinion, an hour is a long time to not report your 5-year-old kid missing. Like, not even to tell carnival security for over an hour? Especially in an area that's this busy? I know it was the 90s, but even so, that seems kind of negligent to me. Anyway, once Timmy was reported missing, the park was emptied and shut down immediately. I would have thought that it would actually be the opposite. Kinda like a nobody leaves this park until we find this kid situation. Because if someone had taken Timmy, this is the perfect opportunity to disappear into a massive crowd of people and leave the premises. My guess is that because he had already been gone an hour, the only reason he'd still be in the park was if he was lost, so maybe they wanted to see if that was a possibility. Officers called for a full team, and they searched the park, storm drains, and nearby woods and fields with cadaver dogs by their side. Then, about 2 in the morning, the search was called for the night. The next day, police brought Michelle in to give an official statement on what had happened. But before she even came in, Michelle was the prime suspect, as parents are always naturally suspects in the event of a missing child. Filicide is the deliberate act of a parent killing his or her own child. An American study shows that in cases of child homicides from 1975 to 2000, in which the child was under 6, filicide made up 60% of them. It also found that in the same age group of children, filicide was more common among young, unmarried mothers, which, if you think about it, probably makes sense because young single mothers often don't get a lot of support, both socially and financially. I also just wanted to note that in no way is this study or myself saying that young single mothers are likely to kill their children. This is obviously very rare. It just means that in the study they did, this was a reoccurring pattern. But let's get back to the case. So, Timmy's father, George, hadn't had contact with the boy in years, and was confirmed to be in Iowa, over 1,000 miles away, so he was pretty much immediately ruled out. But police were very suspicious of Michelle's lack of emotion to Timothy's disappearance. Many witnesses reported that she seemed eerily nonchalant about her son missing. However, is there a textbook definition of how a mother is supposed to act when something so terrible occurs? I mean, everyone handles trauma and grief differently. So, in her taped interviews, Michelle acknowledges that she has been read her rights, but it looks to me as though she didn't get a lawyer because the video then shows her giving a statement alone. Let me say it, guys. Always get a lawyer. It doesn't matter if you're guilty or innocent. Just get a lawyer. She tells investigators she and Timmy had gone to Homedale Park and parked in a specific lot close by and then went to the carnival around 7 p.m. Officers immediately began to pick apart her story and soon realized that the parking lot Michelle had claimed to park in during the day had actually been closed on May 25th. So was this just a minor mistake and she had simply forgotten where she parked? Or was it because she was never at Homedale Park at all that day? Over a week later, on June 6th, things got even more suspicious when Michelle began to tell a different story. She now claimed that 2 men had held a knife to Timmy at the carnival and told her they would kill him if she screamed. The police were obviously super confused, so they wanted to ask her a couple more questions. But before they could clarify any more information, Michelle actually became so agitated that she stormed out of the police station. Not to worry though, because Michelle would show up at the police station again the next day. This time, believe it or not, with a third story. In this version, 2 men and a woman took Timmy. But she had more details this time. She actually knew this woman. She said a woman named Ellen, whom she knew from the bank she used to work at, had told Michelle that she would watch Timmy while she went to go get a soda. But when she returned, they had the knife to Timmy. Then they told her that they would give her a call later, presumably for a ransom, and that Timmy would be back within the month. Police put in a huge effort to find this mystery Ellen, but they could never find her. But then again, I've heard it is really hard to find people who don't exist. I'm obviously only half serious about that last part. It's just, I don't know about you guys, but I'm starting to feel a little bit suspicious of Michelle now, after her third story. While some of the police are interviewing Michelle, other detectives were trying to find a witness who could place Timmy at the carnival on Saturday night, but they weren't having much luck. One of the ride operators told detectives he was pretty sure he talked to Timmy and put him on a ride, but he couldn't be sure. On the other hand, another witness remembers talking to Michelle for several minutes at the park while they were waiting in line for a concession stand, but she distinctly remembers there was no child with her. Now, it's possible that this was when Michelle was in line for the soda, but Michelle didn't mention Timmy at all, and according to this witness, wasn't keeping an eye on him like she told investigators she was. Police even asked people to come forward with any photos they took at the carnival, in case Timmy was in the background. But after all the interviews and searches, nobody could 100% place Timmy at the carnival that day. In the weeks following his disappearance, Timmy was featured on America's Most Wanted, he appeared on milk cartons, and tens of thousands of posters with his picture were distributed. However, because the media had publicized Michelle's changes in her story, a lot of the public weren't looking at this as a random abduction. Michelle had also failed 2 polygraphs early on in the investigation. Let's remember, though, that polygraphs are not admissible in court for a reason, because it is not a real way to see if someone is being deceitful. Polygraphs are not always accurate, especially if you're personally tied to the victims. Your emotions can definitely influence the results. The police really wanted to solve this case, but without eyewitnesses, trace evidence, or a body, it just wasn't possible, and there were no developments for months. Fast forward to late October of 1991. A man is doing a bit of bird watching in the marshlands of Edison, New Jersey, just 20 minutes from Sayreville, when he finds a child's sneaker. What kind of sneaker? You guessed it, a Ninja Turtle sneaker. Fortunately, he had remembered seeing those missing child posters all around New Jersey, and thinking quick on his feet, he ran back to his car to get a Ziploc bag to put the shoe in. Then he took it straight to the police. Let's talk about this for a second. First of all, who has Ziploc bags in their car? That's genius. That sounds like something my mom would do. After I'm done this episode, I am going to go put some Ziploc bags in my car. And secondly, DNA testing was still in its infancy, and he had the sense to put the shoe in a sealed bag so it wouldn't be contaminated? This guy is smart. Or maybe he just wanted something to carry the shoe in. I don't know, maybe I'm giving him too much credit. Either way, this guy opened the investigation. When the police presented the shoe to Michelle, which, by the way, was the same size, design, and brand as Timmy's, she was adamant it was not his. Either way, they sent it off to the lab, but because it had been outside for some time, results were inconclusive. With no more evidence, the sneaker was put back in storage, but investigators continued to interview Michelle's friends and families to try to generate some new leads. It was 6 months later when Officer Ronald Buckevich learned in one of the interviews that Michelle had actually previously worked at an industrial complex located right in front of the marshlands where the sneaker was found. Aside from the fact that her former place of employment was just a 5-minute walk from where the shoe was found, it's also interesting because when Michelle had previously given the police her employment history, she failed to mention this job. Armed with this new information, Officer Buckevich organized a team of Edison police officers and FBI agents to search the marshlands in April of 1992. Minutes into the search, they located the second shoe not far from where they had found the first. Continuing on with their search, a couple hours later, they found a child's skull. It was already pretty obvious to investigators who the skull belonged to, but dental records later confirmed that these were the remains of 5-year-old Timothy Wiltsey. Because decomposition was so advanced after 11 months, as they actually said that besides the skull, it was pretty much just small pieces of bone, they couldn't determine a cause of death. However, they were able to say that there were no injuries to his skull, so that makes me think that he probably died due to asphyxiation. But that's just my guess. Along with the remains was a blue and white blanket and an old balloon. I'm sure detectives thought the same thing, but to me, this says remorse. I think the fact that the body was dumped in a blanket shows the killer probably had a personal connection to the victim. I'm also thinking, and this is pure speculation on my part, that the balloon could maybe have represented some sort of funeral? So if the killer's feeling remorseful, maybe they wrapped him up in a blanket and tied a balloon to the body because they thought that would be a nice way to lay him to rest. But again, that is just my take. I also want to go back to the sneakers for a second. As I mentioned, lab results were inconclusive, but considering it was found very near Timmy's remains, and they were the same size and brand that he was reported missing with, isn't it very, very likely that they were his? So when Michelle saw the shoe, why was she so sure that it wasn't his? Of course you can argue that maybe she just got mixed up and forgot what the shoe looks like, or maybe she didn't want to admit that it was his shoe because that would be too hard to think about. But you can also point to the idea, did she say it wasn't his to steer officers away from the marshlands area? Did she know that they were going to discover something if they searched there? Another incriminating detail is how Michelle responded to the discovery of Timothy's remains. According to police reports, Michelle was very calm when police told her they had found the body of her deceased son. And like I said before, everyone responds differently. But here's the weird thing. She didn't ask officers anything. Not where he was found, how he'd been killed. Wouldn't you have some questions? So on May 12th, 1992, almost a year after he disappeared, Timothy Wiltsey was finally laid to rest. But investigators still continued to doubt Michelle Ledzinski. Almost 2 years later, in January of 1994, is where this case gets bonkers. There had still been no advancements in Timmy's case, but now the police had a new problem to deal with. On January 21st, 1994, Michelle's car was found idling in her driveway with the door wide open and her purse still inside. The media was quick to jump on this, printing headlines that wrote, "Timothy's mom, missing." But just when Michelle's family were feeling sick to their stomach, Michelle was found the very next day in Detroit. She claimed she had been kidnapped by 2 FBI agents to teach her a lesson about Timmy. But it gets better. A week later, she reportedly found an FBI business card taped to her door with the words, "It's not over," written on it. This actually sounds like some kind of child spy movie, where the police are all secretly bad guys and they use cliché threats like, "It's not over." But nonetheless, police had to look into it. And days later, they found that the business card found on Michelle's door had been printed at a local print shop. But here's the kicker. Beside the order was Michelle's pager number. Confronted with this, she confessed to creating the false note and faking her own kidnapping, apparently to drive more attention to Timmy's case. With this, she was actually sentenced to 6 months house arrest and 3 years parole for faking her own kidnapping. However, she then broke her parole in 1997 when she stole one of her co-workers' computers. After this, I think it either confirmed people's suspicions or made those who previously thought she was innocent now question her. Okay, so she's not a model citizen. She's a liar. And a very bad one at that. But that doesn't make her a murderer, right? After all of this, Michelle felt she needed to get out of New Jersey, and in 1998 briefly moved to Florida before then moving to Minnesota, where she gave birth to another baby boy. In 2003, she returned to Florida and had another child, also a boy, and continued on with her life. Meanwhile, back in her home state of New Jersey, cold case investigators had decided to take another look at Timothy's case, especially that blue blanket found at the crime scene. They hoped the blanket could provide some new information that wasn't available back in 1992. Perhaps some DNA, fingerprints, or even some new statements from different witnesses. Unfortunately, all results from the lab were again inconclusive. But investigators still had some people they wanted to interview. Originally, when they had found the blanket, they had only presented it to Michelle and her mother Alice. Both said they did not recognize it. This time, detectives showed the blanket to 3 of Timmy's former babysitters, including Danielle Girding and Michelle's niece Jennifer Blair, who had both helped search for Timmy on that hot spring night in May of 1991. All 3 ladies confirmed that the blanket was one they had seen before at Michelle and Timmy's house. Jennifer even burst into tears upon being shown the blanket. Keep in mind, though, that by the time they interviewed these babysitters, it's been about 20 years. However, if this blanket was a security blanket, kind of like a stuffed animal, maybe something that Timmy brought everywhere and was very attached to, then I guess it makes sense as to why they would recognize it. Anyway, this is huge for police because the blanket obviously implies that it was not a stranger abduction. Someone would have had to bring the blanket from Timmy's house and leave him wrapped in it.
So maybe the blanket was a sign of remorse. With this new witness testimony, prosecutors were confident they could build a case against Michelle. And on August 6, 2014, which coincidentally would have been Timmy's 29th birthday, Michelle Ledzinski was arrested at her Florida home. In March 2016, Michelle went to trial for the murder of her son Timothy. The prosecution relied heavily on witness testimony. They argued that the blanket at the crime scene being tied to Michelle's house by witnesses proved she was involved in her son's murder. They also called the witness, who back in 1991 claimed she had talked to Michelle at the carnival for several minutes without Timmy present. She was very confident in her memory of that night. Other witnesses were simply brought in to damage Michelle's character. Timmy's school nurse testified that Michelle had never hugged or kissed her son when dropping him off at school. Another told jurors that Michelle was known to party a lot when she was in her early 20s. However, what really got jurors to question Michelle's character was the 3 different stories she had told investigators back in 1991. The prosecution asked what so many others wondered. If she were innocent, why would she keep changing her story? Fortunately for Michelle, the judge ruled that her fake kidnapping was not relevant to the crime and therefore could not be presented to the jury. Despite the prosecution's case being entirely circumstantial, the defense struggled with Michelle's previously changing stories. They told jurors that these conflicting versions of events was simply because of Michelle's bad mental state after losing her son in such a traumatic way. The defense also argued that the police were unable to connect the blanket with any physical evidence, as lab results could neither confirm nor rule out the possibility of the blanket coming from the home. Then, the defense team brought in a man who worked at the carnival way back in 1991. He testified that he remembered putting a boy on a ride who matched Timmy's description. He hadn't come forward before because he didn't realize that he had seen the boy until the missing person flyers were distributed across New Jersey. He also couldn't remember who the boy was with. Arguably, the defense's most crucial testimony was that of Damien Dowdle, a former inmate who claimed his cellmate Bernard Joseph McShane had told him he had murdered a 5-year-old boy back in 1991 after taking him from a park where there was, quote, a big event going on, just outside of what he called Atlanta City. Dowdle later realized that McShane probably meant Atlantic City in New Jersey and reported the conversation. But when the alleged killer took the stand, he denied ever making this claim to his cellmate, even saying being here for the trial was his first time ever being in New Jersey. Unfortunately, for the defense, Dowdle had no other details of his supposed confession, such as whether McShane had said where he disposed of the body, so they couldn't do much with this. After they presented both sides, the jury of 7 men and 5 women were sent to deliberate. But hours into the deliberation, one of the jurors was removed after he was found to have done his own research outside of the courtroom, which is considered juror misconduct and obviously forbidden. The next day, a new juror was brought in and they were instructed to go back to deliberating. The defense were furious. They argued to the judge that this should have ended in an automatic mistrial, but the judge denied any need for a new trial. In May of 2016, 25 years after the murder of Timothy Wiltsey, the jury found Michelle Ledzinski guilty of the murder of her son. Her sentencing was set for August, but because the defense were attempting to get a new trial, her sentencing was delayed a couple months. Finally, in January of 2017, Michelle was sentenced to 30 years in prison with no chance of parole and was allowed to include time served. So, since she had already been in prison for 2.5 years at this point, her sentence will be just over 27 years. More recently, in August 2019, her defense team attempted to appeal her conviction based on lack of evidence and juror misconduct, but it was denied. For now, Michelle Ledzinski remains at the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility in Hunterdon County in New Jersey. She will not be allowed out until she is 76 years old. As always, I would love to hear your guys' take on the case. So, did Timothy finally get justice after 25 years? Or is an innocent woman in jail? For those who believe Michelle's guilty, do you think there was enough evidence to arrest her? Do you think she was given a fair trial? You can share your thoughts with me on any of my platforms, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, at Always Time for True Crime. And if you're feeling super nice today, you can leave me a review in Apple Podcasts. Thanks, guys, and I'll be back again next week with another case.